And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive.
Welcome to Better to Speak, the podcast, where we use storytelling to transform silence into language and action. I'm your host, Kési Felton. I don't want to take up too much time in the intro because I want y'all to get into this interview with Tricia Hersey, the founder, curator of the Nap Ministry, aka the Nap Bishop. The Nap Ministry is an Atlanta-based organization that examines the liberating power of naps. Now, when I first heard of her and the Nap Ministry, she hosted a writing workshop at this pop-up hosted by the Atlanta chapter of the Free Black Women's Library back in October. She explores the trauma of sleep deprivation as a racial and social justice issue, the impact of capitalism on our spirits and bodies, and most importantly, the power of rest and communal healing. Her work has ranged from public installations where she's taken naps, where other people can nap, to lectures, to writing workshops, as I mentioned, and again, centering things like spiritual, liberatory healing practices that emphasize community and soul care to allow us to come home to our bodies and resist the capitalist, individualist society that we live in, which tells us that we should put productivity above everything. As I've begun my own rest practice, and we elaborate on what exactly that means in the interview, I realized that even being in my early 20s, where the cultural narrative for a lot of us is to grind and work super hard so we can enjoy our 30s and beyond, that way of thinking and being has taken a huge toll on me just out of the desire to work and be involved in things and really prove myself, to be quite honest, and ultimately make sure that I'll have a financially secure future. Those are all things that keep me from embracing and prioritizing rest. And not just sleep necessarily, but idle time, daydreaming, and just being, which Tricia later explains in the interview. So there was always that underlying fear of damn near anxiety, really, of just, being productive in some way, shape, or form at all times. And that way of being doesn't allow you to just be and enjoy simply existing. And thinking about that contextually as a Black person, specifically as a Black woman, we're never allowed to just be. Society and history tells us that we have to work harder to get certain things. If and when we do get those things, we have to work harder to keep a grip on them. And we see that the role of Black women in society is often to bear its burdens, to bear the burdens of our local communities and even our households, our families in a lot of ways. So Black women really are not given room to rest. Black people are not given room to rest. And in doing so, in reclaiming our bodies, reclaiming our time, our energy, and actively prioritizing rest, it truly is an act of resistance to every facet of society that demands our labor, whether that be physical, mental, or emotional labor, every second of every day. So there's this article that I read a while ago that I actually want to read an excerpt from here. Of the two types of intellectuals that lingered in the cultural memory of Africans, only the medicine man was compatible with the condition of plantation slavery. The priests were not to be tolerated by slaveholders for at least two reasons. First, at a pragmatic level, the slaveholding class sought to extract as much work as possible from the Africans. In a social order based on economic definitions of worth, the idea of a reflective and non-laboring slave was unimaginable. And so reading that gave me a lot of context to Tricia's work with the Nap Ministry and contextualized this concept of rest as resistance. As I've begun learning about capitalism and anti-capitalism more specifically, juxtaposed with the legacy of chattel slavery, it's shown me that rest truly is an act of resistance, especially for Black folks. You see so many stats about the toll that stress from daily life as well as systemic racism takes on our lives and our bodies, but there aren't mass movements to really understand that and unlearn it and cultivate lives of rest and ease. The stereotype of, Black people being lazy is definitely one thing that is always in the back of my mind, that feeling of, if I don't overexert myself constantly, that people will see me as lazy. And so that's just one way, I don't want to fulfill the stereotype, that people may be perceiving me through. And so not that, the biggest concern here is not that I won't accomplish my goals for my own life or that I won't be the person that I want to be. It's that other people might see me as lazy. And so that's often the mindset that I take with me into work, school, and even when I'm at home, which should really be, the headquarters of my rest and relaxation. And so I definitely said that I did not want to take a long time on the intro, but reflecting on my conversation with Tricia in the past I would say the past couple of weeks since that took place has definitely inspired me to not only think about the role that rest plays or even doesn't play in my life, but also to make it a point to actively resist white supremacist capitalist culture and make time for resting and dreaming and reconnecting with myself. And so I really hope y'all feel her words like I felt them, because she definitely dropped a lot of gems throughout our conversation. That's why they call her the Nap Bishop. And I'll be sure to include information about how you can connect with her and the Nap Ministry in the show notes.
I was born in Chicago, grew up there my entire life. I now live in Atlanta. I've been here for 10 years, but both sets of my grandparents were a part of the Great Migration. So they left the South, Mississippi, and Louisiana to come up to Chicago. And so I've been doing work in Chicago for years as a theater maker, artist, teaching artist, doing a lot of mostly things in art. And so when I moved to Atlanta, I decided to go to graduate school. So I went to divinity school at Emory University, the Candler School of Theology. I was here for like maybe 2 years and decided I wanted to go back to school, but didn't know what I wanted to go for. And so I went with this calling in my heart about wanting to go and study Black liberation theology and womanist theology. And while there, I was, like most people who I talked to in graduate programs, started to feel the pressure and the grind, and it was very traumatic being in school at a predominantly white institution, and just the pace of it was nothing like I'd ever seen. And from that experience, I started to just experiment with really just resting, just having a personal experience, me being a tired Black working mom in graduate school full time, just, the Black Lives Matter was heating up at the time. So that was a lot of happening in the world around race and around trauma and protesting. And I was involved in a lot of that. And so I just started to just rest and started to feel better. And then I started to just integrate all the things I was learning in my program. And also having a background of being a performance artist and theater maker, and also a community activist. I started to just think of the ways in which what was happening to me on a somatic level, how I was feeling better from resting, how I felt like I was receiving downloads from my ancestors. I was able to really create this dream space for myself to be able to get me to tap into my higher self, and also to disrupt and push back against capitalism and push back against what white supremacy wanted me to think of myself. And so all those things just led into me experimenting. So the Nap Ministry really is an experiment. I never in any way, shape, or form thought, I'm going to start this organization. It's going to be this global movement. Thousands of people are going to be watching. I just really thought this was a cool project. I'm an artist. I'm interested in it. I'm curious in it. And so I've popped off so many different art projects over my course of being an artist for close to 20 years. And this was just one of many. I was like, we'll see where it goes. I thought it would be a one-day only event. I did a one-woman show around the work, presented it in Atlanta, and it just kept growing. That was in 2017, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. So that's kind of like how I'm here now, is just being a curious Black woman who wanted to experiment.
And then my next question is, as I was writing these and thinking about what the conversation would be today, I was thinking that rest seems like something that's so inherent to human behavior, something that we shouldn't have to think about. So can you talk about what does it mean to cultivate an intentional rest practice?
Yeah, it shouldn't be radical that I'm talking about rest, and right. I'm talking about go to sleep, but that tells you how deep we are in the culture that we live in our American culture and the Western culture. Really, it's not just America's the Western world. I want to say it's the global world. But specifically here in the U.S., white supremacy and capitalism is what I call grind culture. So grind culture is the collaboration of those two things, and also patriarchy. So all these oppressive, toxic systems have collaborated together to make it what we feel that our worth is. We have our worth as human beings based on how much we produce. Everything is about production and being a tool for the production of capitalism, which really goes back to slavery. It goes back to, the history of our ancestors working on plantations, being enslaved and being the people who built this entire economic system on their backs, without resting, without sleeping, seeing people as human machines. And so because we are so deeply in that culture, and many a times we don't even realize we are in it, because it's just a part of our socialization as we're born in this country. From the time you're born, you're trained. All of culture is working against you to kind of like not rest, to kind of train you to be this human machine who can produce for this big system. And so really, I think the first part of this work is really just uplifting that fact and letting people know you have been brainwashed. Like this is a real thing. Like you don't really realize it because you're living it, but when you start to like just illuminate it. So my really goal when I first started was just to like bring this up and just give it an idea to say, this is what's happening. People were like, really? I can't believe that. I'm like, no, you are brainwashed. If you grew up here, you're in this toxic system. And so really getting to a rest practice is where the disruption and the pushback and the resistance comes from. The framework that I've created is the rest is resistance framework. And so from that framework, we look at how rest is really a disruption, a pushback against these two toxic systems that say we aren't enough, we have to do more. And so that's where it becomes a resistance movement. That's where this is really a political and social justice movement. And it's really a social and racial justice issue. So it's not just about mere wellness. It's really about like pushing back and disrupting. So that's why it's so important to have this consistent rest practice so that you can start to deprogram your own mind and also collectively help to like dismantle and upset capitalism and white supremacy.
Mm-hmm. And one way in which I see grind culture showing up a lot, especially as a student at Howard University, like I see that, you know, in leadership positions and of course classes, like I see that among, you know, people my age a lot. And so I'm curious, like, what do you have to say to younger people who are like, you know, getting caught up in grind culture? That's one thing that I'm trying to be intentional about now is like, how can I pull back from that, you know, and set that foundation as a young adult before like I actually get into the working world?
Yeah, that's so important. I really, I just tweeted this yesterday, and I believe this was on my heart, that academia, education from public school all the way through graduate school, but academia as a whole is the headquarters for grind culture. It is the training ground. It's where they're training us and you to kind of be ready to be put out into the world and continue this. So it's really the place where we really need to be digging deep for people to really be thinking about how do you reimagine rest? And that's where this concept of imagination and tapping into Afrofuturism comes in, and tapping into a reparations theory and really looking at rest not as something that's this frivolous afterthought that you do once you're burnt out, once you're tired. It really has to be consistently a part of the whole framework for your life, you know, like, so you're a graduate student, you're in school, it has to start to become a framework for how you become a scholar, your scholarship, your ideas, how you move, the jobs you'll pick, how you'll be a citizen in this country. You really have to start thinking about it now and gaining a rest practice now and reimagining what that can look like. We have to tap into what our ancestors knew. They knew how to be subversive, flexible, how to create everything out of nothing. And so we have to like really start to critique our lives and critique the systems that we're caught up in. So that could look like for college students, you know, saying no to some of the extracurricular things that you have. You know, really looking at your calendar and like looking at it in a way that you can find 10 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 15 minutes here to rest, to daydream, to slow down, to really be intentional about the things that you relate with. And so when I was in school, when I started the nap ministry in graduate school, I was taking naps all over campus. Like I was 5 minutes here. That really saved my life, these 10-minute cat naps. And also, I was really looking at the classes I took and trying to get through the program in a way, going to my teachers and telling them, look, I'm a mother, I work a job, I'm a dedicated student, but I cannot read 1,000 pages by the end of the week. Can we do a different syllabus? You know, can we look at a different way for me? Can we be flexible? So it really is tapping into like advocating for yourself and really beginning to slowly look at rest as a meticulous love practice. It's not going to be anything that's going to happen overnight. You'll be deprogramming from grind culture for the rest of your life. So.
And then I was also thinking about, you mentioned the rest as resistance framework, and thinking about, of course, the moment that we're in with the coronavirus pandemic and these uprisings going on. So how does rest fit into that? Because I think people would see like rest and think that's antithetical to like what everything that's going on. Like we have to be, organizing and getting things together and like mobilizing people. Like how does rest fit into everything that we're kind of going through right now?
Rest is the foundation for this new world that we're trying to build. Rest is the foundation for us to be able to imagine and build and get the innovative information we need to get to the next level of our liberation. It's a liberation practice. It's not something that has to be done after. I believe as an activist and organizer, we need to be resting as part of our strategic framework for how we move about our movement ideas. We need to have rest built in, silence, slowing down. We need to be able to tap in to the knowledge and the power that's already been done for us. We come from a long lineage of people who've disrupted and fought against oppression. And so we have to tap into that. I think about Harriet Tubman, and I was reading about her and how while she was on the Underground Railroad, literally running for her lives with white men behind her with this bounty on her head, she was stopping and praying. She was stopping at trees and stopping and praying, like just to really think about how deep that is, that she was like running for her life and taking many people with her to freedom, walking, dogs and horses and men with guns on her. And she felt like it was enough space that she needed to stop and get a silent word from above, that she needed to center herself. And so I always think about her, think about our other movement ancestors, my grandmother who would always rest with her eyes closed, and that helped her to like get through her life and the trauma of being a Jim Crow survivor. And so we really have to start flipping rest on its head and realize that if you've been bamboozled by a system that's told you you aren't anything unless you work and work and work yourself to death, once you know that that's a lie and that's like not true, then you can begin to start reopening up the space to know, you know what, rest is important. It's not an afterthought. It's part of me being a person who's going to be involved in movement work, who's going to be pushing back against oppression, who's going to be fighting in the streets, doing direct actions. Like you have to have it as this foundation to be able to imagine and build.
Mm-hmm. And then what you were mentioning about, how capitalism wants us or sees us as machines, wants us to see ourselves as human machines. Like how do people begin to do that work of unlearning, what you call like the brainwashing? Like how do we unlearn like what we've internalized about, the world?
Yeah, that deprogramming. It's a slow, meticulous process. It really goes to looking at who you are. Like I think at the end of the day, rest is kind of undoing what history has done. It's kind of undoing the lies that we've been told about ourselves our whole lives, that you're lazy, you're not enough unless you produce this, get up, do something. Like it really goes back to it's a spiritual practice of looking at yourself as a divine human being. Like capitalism sees us as a machine, and we know that's not true. We know that we are divine human beings who are just worthy of life simply because we're alive. And so this really is a spiritual piece that comes into it, a deep-seated knowing, tapping into our ancestors, tapping into who we are, tapping into the power of who we are just because we're alive. And so it's a very, it's bringing us back to ourselves. It's a call back to who we are, into our natural state.
And in that same vein, like thinking about how would I incorporate this into my own life, I think, one like fear that came up was like, okay, well, if I'm not resting, like I'm missing opportunities. I'm missing opportunities to get money to like feed my family, or like, thinking of somebody who's a parent or whatever. Like, I think that that is more indicative of like the system and how unjust the system is. So how do you imagine the NAP ministry and the movement that you're starting with this to impact like policy and actual infrastructure?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really interested in collective and communal care, and the concept of community care and communities coming together to like make space for other people to rest. And so on a policy level, I really think that what's happening now with COVID and what people when we went on lockdown, everybody was working from home. Disabled people been asking to work from home for forever, and jobs have been telling them it can't work. We can't find a way to do it, and all of a sudden, everybody's at home working. Everybody's a shortened work week. I would love. There's a movement happening for a 4-day work week. I would love to see something like that where we are able to enact some type of 4-day work week where we're able to get policy in where people have longer paternal, when they have a baby, they can stay home longer. All of these things, everything centers around systems of care. And so this is a political and social justice movement. And so we really are, at the end of the day, looking to not wait for policy, because we know policy comes when it wants to come. We can work as hard as we want, but we have to know the bigger system we live in. But I'm really interested in being subversive and disrupting the system and pushing back and not waiting and gaining our reparations and our liberation now, and seeing how that can look like in a individual way, like one-on-one, people laying down and sleeping, but at the same time, it's really about the collective. It's about us communally coming together to say, no, we are enough. We're not going to be overworking ourselves, and making space for others to rest, and creating opportunities for people to be able to slow down. And it's going to start first from us internally, knowing that about ourselves, like not, teaching people how to be with you. Like, when somebody wants to work with me as a NAP ministry, they have to know I'm not going to be returning emails immediately. It might take days. You're not going to rush me. I'm not overbooking my schedule. I have an assistant who does some work for me. Like, she makes her own schedule. I'm not micromanaging you. I trust you, to do the work. And so it's really looking at a system and a concept of abundance, and not looking at scarcity. We've been taught an abundance model of living that there's not enough for everyone. That's the lie. There's enough for every single person to have tons of things. This scarcity model keeps us in the system of thinking we're going to miss out, being fearful, being afraid. And so once we can start collectively as a community getting to a model of abundance and knowing what really we have as being beings here on this earth, I think that'll be like the next dimension for us to start to talk about policy. It has to start first from inside, because as we know, the tricks of our political systems, the ways that things work, it really has to start from you and people who are 6 feet around you, and just building out these small community level ways.
Mm-hmm. And that was actually my next question about how, capitalism wants us to be disconnected either from, each other or from our own bodies. So how what does rest mean for collective care? Like, what does collective care mean for rest?
Yeah, capitalism wants us working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they want us to be on a human machine level pace. And so when you think about it, I think people don't really sit and think about what that means and what they're trying to do with that. I think we kind of gloss over it a little bit because we're so used to that's what it is. But to think about how inhumane, how toxic, how violent that is, grind culture is violence. And so once we can sit in the truth of that, it's maybe a hard pill to swallow, but that's part of the deprogramming. We'll understand that rest disrupts and makes space for us to have healing. It's a healing portal for us to go into a rest state and to gain a word from this dream space that we cultivated for ourselves. And so it really makes sense why they don't want us resting, because when you're resting, even on a biological level, your mind is in your creativity, everything is at high level alert. You're at genius level. You're at the level of where you can figure a lot of things out. So I think if we were not exhausted and numb and such on robot mode, we would be able to figure a lot of things out and be able to see ourselves as really the divine creatures that we are. And so rest allows and disrupts that. It makes space for it. It centers our liberation as a place of being in a rested state. We won't be able to get to these new liberated places without being rested. We won't be able to, care for each other without being rested. We'll just continue to be really being violent with ourselves and each other. And so it's a deeper, people think it's just this, oh, I'm tired, I want to lay down, it's just, I want to sleep. It's like this frivolous, soft thing, and it is, but it's really a powerful place to be in a rested state. And naps help you wake up. They help you wake up to the truth of who you are, to what you're dealing with, to what you're living under. And once you wake up, it's like once a person is woken up, I believe so much in the divinity of human beings that once a person has woken up to the truth of who they are, they're unstoppable. We'll be able to really get to our liberated place and get to our freedom, really.
I love that. And then my last question is, you mentioned the phrase rest is reparations, and I think in some conversations about reparations, people just say like, just, cash every black person a check and move on. So what does it mean to see rest as reparations, and what does that look like as like a long-term vision?
Yeah, I have been saying cut the check for 15 years. I've been reparations queen, speaking about it, writing about it for years, and so I'm with that as well. Absolutely, right. Yeah. But I think reparations, in the way that I'm thinking about it, is thinking about these micro details, what was happening on plantations all over the South and all over with Black people, and how they didn't have space to rest, and so how we can reclaim that for them in this dimension. It goes back to like ancestor communication and being able to uplift and hold what they did for us. And so for me, it was really personal. It was me saying to myself, my ancestors never rested. My grandmother never had opportunity to rest. She was a sharecropper and working herself to death. So what would it look like now for me to regain rest for them in this dimension, to like take reparations into our own hands? When I think about reparations theory, I think about it from this active resistance of really ancestor honoring them. It's an honor. I will never grind for a culture and for a system that still owes my ancestors money. You have a debt. It doesn't make any sense for us to be grinding for a culture and for this system that our parents and our great grandparents and all of their ancestors really built. So they owe us. And so we need to be resting the most. We've never had any type of way to really gain any type of wealth from what's happening to us. And so now is a way for us to regain it in this dimension for them, and to I think all Black people should be resting even more than anyone. We are the ones who are dealing most with sleep deprivation. We've been dealing with sleep deprivation since we were in the fields, and so it continues on. It's just like transferred into a new way. And so it really means that we have to like resist and refuse and honor and like connect with the people who laid the way for us. And so in that way, it's reparations. Rest becomes a reparations move for me to be able to say, well, they couldn't rest, so I'm getting it for them now. And also you can communicate and have a connection with them in those dreams as well.
Mm-hmm. And then keeping all that in mind, what final piece of advice or like actionable next step would you have for listeners in terms of, them cultivating their own rest practice?
Yeah, I think slow down. You're not going to miss out. I want people to just know what's for you is for you. What's meant for you is meant for you. I have built a global business by myself, and I say no to 90% of things asked of me. And I've always said no. I don't say yes to every single thing. Saying no is really a blessing. You're not going to miss out, because you can't miss out on whatever is already your calling. It's already a calling on your life. So there's no such thing as FOMO. You won't miss out on a new opportunity. I said no to one thing that was this amount when I think as a business person, it was this amount of money. And I was like, no, it just doesn't feel right. And a week later, I got 3 times the amount for somebody else who did feel right. So we just have to trust more and be radical in our faith and radical in our trust about who we are and what's for us. And also dig deep into an abundance model. An abundance model says there is enough for everyone. You will be taken care of. Things are well. Your who you are as a human being will be provided for if you just follow your calling, follow your heart, follow what's best and what you feel that you want to do, and just trust. So I think grind culture has taken away our ability to hope, our ability to trust, and our ability to imagine. And when you can't do those 3 things, you'll say yes to anything, and you'll fear everything. And when you should just be saying, I trust for what the Creator is going to offer to me. I can say no to that, and then I'll know the Creator and the universe will make space for me to be able to move in my in the place I'm supposed to be in.
That's it for this episode. You can find us on social media at bettertospeak_ or on our website, bettertospeak.org. If you want to sponsor an episode and support Better to Speak, you can find the link to donate in the description of whatever podcasting platform you're listening on. Be sure to tune in to future episodes where we'll dive into various socio-political topics with the goal of transforming silence into language and action. Once again, I'm your host, Kési Felton. Thank you for listening.